You know that feeling when you're up against something totally new at work, maybe in life,
Yeah.
and your usual ways, your like go-to moves, just don't seem to work.
Like you're stuck.
Exactly. Stuck wading through treacle almost.
Yep.
The stuff that always worked before just doesn't.
It's a really common experience, actually. In those unfamiliar spots, the very habits that usually help us can suddenly become, well, the biggest roadblocks.
Right. And that's where this whole idea of deliberate calm seems so interesting. Our sources for this deep dive talk about it as more than just staying calm under pressure.
Yeah, it's not just about gritting your teeth.
It's about consciously choosing how you respond
Okay.
when things are volatile,
Yeah.
uncertain, moving from just reacting automatically.
Acting thoughtfully,
Yeah.
intentionally, stepping back from that sort of knee-jerk reaction.
But that's what we want to do today, right?
Yeah.
Really dig into deliberate calm, explore how you, listening, can maybe start using these ideas to handle new challenges, learn better, without just feeling swamped.
And we'll look at how our brains and bodies actually, react in these new situations. Understanding that reaction can give you more control. It's quite empowering.
Definitely. And this isn't just some theory someone cooked up, is it?
No, not at all. It's grounded in, well, decades of practical work, working with executives, leaders, people facing all sorts of high-stress situations.
And it draws on neuroscience research, too, understanding how our brains actually work.
Precisely. There's solid science behind it.
And the results seem pretty compelling. The sources mention this program with over 1,400 leaders at a big pharma company. Just 30 minutes a week for 3 months. And they saw a 3-fold jump in improvement, performance, adaptability compared to others.
And their well-being scores went up 7 times more. It's significant.
Wow. Okay, so it clearly has an impact. Let's dive in. One of the first big ideas they use is an iceberg.
Yeah, the iceberg metaphor. It's a really useful way to think about what we see versus what's hidden. Our behaviors, what we do, what we say, that's like the tip of the iceberg. Visible.
Okay, the bit above the water.
Exactly. But the vast majority, the huge mass underneath the waterline, that represents all the hidden drivers.
Like our thoughts, feelings.
Thoughts, feelings, yeah. But also deeper stuff. Our beliefs, our mindsets, even our core identity, our values, our fears, all that stuff shapes the behavior you actually see.
So the key point is, if you want to change the behavior, the bit you see.
You have to understand what's going on underneath. You need to look below the waterline at those thoughts and beliefs driving the actions. You can't just tweak the surface stuff effectively.
Got it. To really adapt, we need to explore that hidden part.
Absolutely. Understand the why behind the what.
There's a great example in the source material, Jeff, head of sales.
Yeah.
Sales are dropping because the industry is changing, but his knee-jerk reaction is just, I got this.
Right. Sounds confident on the surface.
But underneath, in his iceberg, Jeff has this deep belief that his worth, especially to his boss, is all about delivering results, always.
So this new challenge where he doesn't have the answers immediately.
It triggers fear. Fear of failure, fear of looking bad.
Exactly. So saying, I got this, isn't really about confidence. It's a protective move. It's trying to manage that fear, regain some sense of control.
Even if it stops him from actually, asking for help or looking for real solutions.
Precisely. And here's a crucial point the sources make. These patterns, these habits, like Jeff's, they aren't necessarily bad or wrong in themselves.
They probably worked for him before, right?
That's likely, yeah. They're mental shortcuts. They become habits because they were effective in familiar situations. His take charge style probably got him promoted.
But the problem comes when the situation changes, when it's new, unfamiliar.
That's when those old reliable shortcuts can actually trip us up. They stop us from seeing the new reality clearly or finding a better way to respond.
So Jeff, promising to fix sales when he doesn't know how, that just makes things worse.
And this brings us to what the sources call the adaptability paradox.
Okay, what's that?
It's this tricky situation where the very moment you most need to adapt, to be creative, to let go of old ways, that's exactly when the pressure and uncertainty make it hardest to do so. We feel threatened by the unfamiliarity.
So we retreat back to the old habits.
We tend to, yes,
Yeah.
back to our comfort zone, even if it's not helping anymore. The pressure pushes us towards safety, towards the known.
So how do we start to break that cycle? The sources mention something called dual awareness.
Yes, dual awareness is presented as the first key skill. It's about being consciously aware of two things at once.
Okay, it's two things.
What's happening externally, the situation, other people, the environment, and what's happening internally, your thoughts, your feelings, your physical sensations.
So noticing the outside and the inside.
And crucially, seeing how they influence each other, how your internal state affects how you perceive the external, and how the external situation triggers internal responses.
Right, like seeing the connection.
Exactly. This integrated awareness as the pause, it creates a bit of space to step back from just reacting.
And choose a more intentional response instead.
Precisely. Especially when things are changing fast or are really complex, it's seen as foundational for performing well under pressure.
Let's go back to Jeff. So Jeff 1 is the reactive one, just blurting out, I got this. How would Jeff 2, practicing dual awareness, handle it differently?
Well, Jeff 2 would likely pause first. Just take a beat.
Okay.
In that pause, he'd acknowledge the external reality sales are down, the market's shifting, but he'd also notice his internal reaction, the anxiety, the pressure from his boss, maybe a knot in his stomach.
So he clocks the feeling.
He clocks the feeling, yeah. And maybe he notices how that anxiety might make him want to overpromise. That awareness is the key difference.
So instead of the instant promise.
He might say something like, okay, I see the numbers and I understand the concern. The market is changing. I need some time to analyze this properly and come back with a realistic plan. He acknowledges the situation and his need to think.
He buys time and maybe even acknowledges his own feelings. Like, this is a tough challenge for all of us.
He could, yeah. That creates a more open, less defensive space. But getting there, being able to do that under pressure, that takes practice.
Right, it's not just flicking a switch.
No, it's about developing the skill of observing yourself, noticing the racing heart, the tense shoulders, the anxious thoughts as they happen, without getting swept away immediately.
And the sources say you need to practice this when things are calm, or so
Yeah.
you can access it when stressed.
Exactly. Build the muscle in low-stakes situations. Practice noticing your internal state and the external world during everyday moments. Then, when the pressure hits, you're more likely to be able to create that moment of awareness, that sort of skylight, as they call it.
Freeing yourself from the hidden iceberg drivers.
That's the idea. Less reactivity, more capacity for thoughtful, maybe even innovative responses.
Okay, building awareness. Now, the sources also talk about different zones we find ourselves in. What are these? Familiar, adaptive.
That's right. They describe 4 zones, basically mapping the level of challenge against our current skills. Familiar zone, adaptive zone, protection zone, and danger zone.
Let's start with familiar. That sounds comfortable.
It usually is. It's where we're using skills we've already mastered. Could be low stakes, like driving to work, or high stakes, like a surgeon performing a routine operation. We feel competent, we know what we're doing.
Makes sense. So the adaptive zone is where things get tricky.
That's where we hit unfamiliar territory. The challenges are new, and our existing skills and approaches just aren't enough anymore.
So we have to learn.
We have to learn. We need new skills, new perspectives. There's often pressure, uncertainty. It demands we step outside our comfort zone and let go of what used to work. This is where real growth happens, but it's inherently uncomfortable.
And this is where that adaptability paradox really bites them.
Exactly. The sources use another example. Raymond, a CEO trying to lead a big company transformation. Managing the day-to-day, that's his familiar zone. But the transformation, that pushes him into the adaptive zone. He needs new ways of leading.
And what happens when he hits resistance? When his old ways don't work?
If he doesn't adapt, if the pressure gets too much, he can shift into the next zone. Protection.
Protection zone. Sounds like putting the defenses up.
It is. We shift here when we feel threatened, which unfamiliar or high-stakes situations often trigger. We crave safety, familiarity, so we tend to revert back to our old ingrained patterns or iceberg stuff.
Even if those patterns aren't working in this new situation.
Especially then. It feels safer to do something familiar than to face the void of the unknown. We get rigid, less open.
So Raymond facing pushback instead of maybe listening differently or changing his approach.
He digs in. Maybe he goes into denial, avoids the difficult conversations, blames others, insists his original plan is perfect. That's his protection mechanism kicking in.
And there's the paradox again. The more he needs to adapt to the resistance.
The more threatened he feels, and the more he clings to the old behaviors that are causing the problem. It's a very human response.
So the goal isn't to never feel threatened.
No, that's unrealistic. The goal is to develop the awareness That dual awareness, again, to notice when we've shifted into protection and then have tools to shift back towards a more resourceful state. Ideally, back towards learning in the adaptive zone.
You mentioned a fourth zone, danger.
Yes, the danger zone. That's an extreme stress response. Think trauma, severe burnout, acute crisis. It's when we feel overwhelmed by threat, and our system basically goes into overdrive hypermobilization, like extreme fight or flight.
Or shuts down completely.
Or shuts down, yeah, hypermobilization, like freeze. Our functional capacity breaks down. It's a physiological survival response to intense perceived danger. Hopefully we stay out of that zone by managing the others.
Right. Okay, so navigating those first three seems key. Now, something that really jumped out at me was this idea about emotions like fear, that they aren't just simple reactions.
Yeah, this is fascinating. The science suggests we don't just passively receive emotions, we actively construct them.
Construct them? How?
Our brains are constantly predictively modeling the world. They're making predictions about what's going to happen next, especially regarding our safety and well-being, based on past experiences and current sensory input.
So emotions are tied to these predictions.
Largely, yes. If the brain predicts safety, we stay calm, open. If it predicts threat, even just uncertainty, which can feel threatening, it shifts us towards protection, triggering feelings like anxiety or fear. It's constantly scanning and predicting.
There's that example of Reshma presenting to her boss, Monica. Reshma feels awful afterwards because Monica seemed distracted, ended the meeting fast.
Right. Reshma's brain interprets Monica's behavior as disapproval, a threat to her competence or standing. It predicts a negative outcome.
And that prediction triggers Reshma's anxiety and upset.
Exactly. But the reality was completely different. Monica was preoccupied because of a family medical emergency. She barely registered the presentation. There was no actual threat to Reshma.
Wow. So Reshma's feeling was real, but it was based on a prediction, not the reality of the situation.
Her brain used past experiences, maybe times she did feel overlooked, and Monica's ambiguous cues, distraction, to construct a narrative of threat. Our brains are wired to err on the side of caution, often seeing threats where none exist, especially in ambiguous social situations.
And those past experiences are sort of personal narratives, really feed into this prediction process, don't they?
Hugely. They act like filters. If Reshma's narrative is "I often get overlooked," she's primed to interpret Monica's distraction that way.
It reinforces the story she tells herself.
Precisely. The sources even mention that study with hotel attendants.
Oh yeah, where they were told their work was good exercise.
And just believing that, changing their perception actually led to measurable health improvements, weight loss, lower blood pressure. It shows the incredible power of our beliefs and narratives on our physical reality.
Mind-body connection right there. Okay, so going deeper still in the iceberg.
Yeah.
Below feelings, we have mindsets and beliefs. How do they act as filters?
Mindsets are like the operating system for our brain's predictions. They're fundamental assumptions about ourselves and the world that guide what we pay attention to and how we interpret it.
So they filter the data coming in.
They have to, yeah. There's too much information bombarding us. Mindsets help simplify, but...
They can create blind spots, things we just don't see because they don't fit our mindset.
Exactly. The example used is Mary, a leader who sees herself as a fierce protector of her team. A good leader protects.
Okay.
So when one of her team members gets criticism, her immediate instinct, driven by that mindset, is to defend him fiercely.
Blocking the criticism.
Pretty much. She filters out the possibility that the feedback might be valid, that her team member might actually need to develop in that area. Her protector mindset blinds her to that possibility.
So she misses an opportunity for growth, both for him and for her as a leader.
Right. Her mindset, while well-intentioned, limits her perspective and actions.
The sources mention different mindset pairs, like fixed versus growth.
Yeah, that's a common one. Fixed mindset. Abilities are innate, set in stone. Growth mindset. Abilities can be developed through effort, learning.
So growth mindset helps in the adaptive zone.
Definitely. It sees challenges as opportunities, not threats to your ego. Then there's expert versus learning mindset.
Expert is about having the answers.
Right. Needing to be right to be the authority. A learning mindset is about curiosity, asking questions, being okay with not knowing, seeing mistakes as data.
And reactive versus creative.
Reactive mindsets tend to jump to existing solutions, problem solving based on the past. Creative mindsets start more with purpose, with possibility, exploring new ways forward.
It feels like shifting towards growth, learning, and creative mindsets is really central to this deliberate, calm idea.
It absolutely is. It's about being open to learning and seeing new possibilities, especially when things are tough.
Which brings us to purpose. The sources talk about purpose as an anchor in those tough times. How does that work?
Having a clear sense of purpose, a why that's bigger than the immediate problem, provides resilience. It's defined as where your passions meet the world's needs.
Like a guiding star.
Kind of, yeah. It gives meaning to the struggle. When you're connected to why something matters deeply to you, it generates an inner sense of courage and, strangely, safety.
Safety? How so?
Because the difficulties feel less like personal threats and more like obstacles on a meaningful journey. You can tolerate the discomfort better because it serves that larger purpose.
There was that example of Daniel, the CMO. He felt overwhelmed trying to have all the answers for his team.
Right, until he reframed his purpose, not as the guy with the answers, but as the facilitator of a collaborative journey of discovery for the team.
And that shift relieved his pressure.
Massively. It reconnected him to a purpose of fostering teamwork and innovation, which felt more authentic and manageable than knowing everything himself. It anchored him.
So how do we find or connect with this purpose? Is it like a lightning bolt moment?
Rarely, I think. The sources suggest it's more of an ongoing practice, reflecting on what you care about, what gives you energy, how your work connects to values that matter to you.
And revisiting it, reminding yourself.
Regularly, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially when things get tough. Connecting back to your why can help you navigate the emotional ups and downs more effectively.
Okay, purpose as an anchor. Now, another really practical piece seems to be managing our energy. The sources stress it's finite.
Absolutely critical. We don't have unlimited reserves of physical, mental, emotional, or even cognitive energy. They're all interconnected resources.
Like different tanks, but they all drain each other.
Sort of, yeah. If you're physically exhausted, it's harder to regulate emotions or think clearly. If you're emotionally drained, you lack mental focus.
The story of Alex really highlighted this. New job, family stress, just pushing through.
And neglecting recovery. He didn't recharge his batteries.
And the result?
His awareness dropped. He became less attuned to his team, less able to adapt to unexpected issues. He started operating more from that protection zone because his resources were depleted.
So low energy makes us more vulnerable to stress and reactivity.
Definitely. Think of it like a body budget, a concept from neuroscientist Lisa Feldman Barrett mentioned in the sources. Your brain is constantly managing this budget, allocating resources.
And if the budget is low,
the brain is more likely to predict threat, to conserve energy, to shut down higher-level thinking like complex problem-solving or empathy. It prioritizes survival.
Which means recovery isn't just nice to have, it's essential for staying adaptable and, well, calm.
It's fundamental. You can't practice dual awareness or access the adaptive zone effectively if your energy budget is chronically overdrawn.
How can we track this? How do we know if we're recovering enough?
The sources suggest a mix. Low tech is just checking in. How am I feeling? What's my mood? Asking trusted friends or family for feedback. How do I seem lately?
Just paying attention.
And high-tech options too, like sleep trackers or monitoring heart rate variability, HRV, which can indicate nervous system recovery.
So finding what works for you to monitor and prioritize that energy renewal.
Exactly, making recovery non-negotiable.
Okay. Now let's talk more about awareness itself. The sources lay out different levels of awareness.
Yeah, it's a kind of progression. 5 levels are described.
Starting with
unaware. Basically, clueless about your internal state or how you're impacting others or the situation. Operating on autopilot.
Damn.
Delayed awareness. You realize after the fact, like, oh man, I really lost my cool in that meeting. Hindsight.
Better than nothing.
Next. Perceptive awareness. You're aware in the moment that you're getting triggered or reacting unhelpfully, but you still find it hard to change course. You see it happening, but can't stop it yet.
Getting closer.
Then, resilient awareness. You notice the trigger in the moment, feel the reaction start, but you can pause, manage the impulse, and choose a more constructive response. Maybe not perfectly, but you intervene.
And the top level.
Adaptive awareness. This is where dual awareness becomes more integrated, more natural. You consistently notice your internal state in the external context, and you can fluidly choose effective, purposeful actions even under pressure. It's the goal state.
The example of Simone, the executive dealing with team setbacks, showed that journey, didn't it?
Perfectly. She moved from being unaware for frustrated impact to realizing it later, delayed, to catching herself mid-reaction, perceptive, then learning to pause and reframe, resilient, until eventually that more adaptive leadership style became her norm.
And tied into this is the Johari window concept. How does that fit?
The Johari window is a simple model for understanding self-awareness in relation to others. It has 4 panes.
Okay.
The arena is what's known to you and others about you, open knowledge. The facade is what you know about yourself but hide from others.
Your secrets?
Sort of. Then the blind spot, this is key what others see in you but you don't see yourself.
Like Mary's protective mindset, maybe?
Exactly. And finally, the unknown, things neither you nor others are aware of yet.
So how do we shrink the blind spot?
Feedback. Getting honest, constructive feedback from others is the main way to bring things from your blind spot into the arena, where you can actually become aware of them and choose to address them. Like Simone hearing how her frustration landed.
So awareness isn't just internal, it involves understanding our impact on others too.
Absolutely, they're intertwined.
Okay, now things get even more complex when we put multiple people, multiple icebergs, together in a team. The sources talk about icebergs colliding.
Yeah, because everyone brings their own hidden beliefs, assumptions, fears, and interpretations, their own iceberg to the table.
And under pressure, these different perspectives can clash.
They often do, leading to misunderstandings, conflict, wasted energy, even when everyone means well.
Like Giovanna's cross-functional team, supply chain issues, quality problems. Everyone had a different idea of what was really going on based on their own viewpoint.
Exactly. Each person was seeing the problem through the lens of their own function, their own pressures, their own hidden assumptions.
So how do we navigate that? The sources bring in the ladder of inference. Sounds like climbing something.
It is. It's a model showing how we mentally climb from observable data, the raw facts of a situation, up through several steps to reach our beliefs and actions.
What are the steps, roughly?
You start with observable data. Then you select certain data to pay attention to, often unconsciously. Then you add meaning based on your past experiences and culture. Then you make assumptions based on that meaning. Then you draw conclusions. Then you opt beliefs based on those conclusions. And finally, you take actions based on those beliefs.
Wow, so we all climb our own ladders from the same starting point.
Often, yes. And because we select different data, add different meaning, make different assumptions based on our own icebergs, we end up on very different rungs with very different conclusions and actions.
Which explains why people can see the same event so differently and end up in conflict.
Precisely. We treat our conclusions at the top of the ladder as obvious truths, forgetting the climb we took to get there.
So how do we use this? By making our own ladder visible.
That's part of it, yes. Being transparent about our reasoning. This is called advocacy, clearly stating our view and the thinking or data behind it. Here's what I think, and here's why.
Okay, showing your steps.
But equally important is inquiry. Asking genuinely curious questions to understand the other person's ladder. Help me understand how you see this. What data are you looking at? What leads you to that conclusion?
So it's balancing stating your view with exploring theirs, non-judgmentally.
That's the key. Curiosity, not accusation. That's how you can have learning conversations, even when icebergs are colliding.
And this kind of open learning conversation sounds like it needs a specific environment, which leads to psychological safety.
Exactly. Psychological safety is crucial for teams, especially when they're operating in that challenging adaptive zone.
Define it again quickly.
It's the shared belief within a team that it's safe to take interpersonal risks. Safe to speak up, ask questions, admit mistakes, offer crazy ideas without fear of being punished, humiliated, or ignored.
And the research, like Google's Project Aristotle, found this was a huge predictor of team success.
The #1 predictor of high-performing teams at Google? Yes. More important than individual skills or structure.
Because without it,
people stay in the protection zone. They don't challenge the status quo. They hide errors. They don't learn collectively. Innovation and adaptation die.
So how can leaders actually build this safety? What does it look like in practice?
The sources mention things like being intentionally inclusive, making sure all voices are heard, actively inviting questions and challenges, responding productively to mistakes, framing them as learning opportunities, showing vulnerability yourself as a leader.
So it's about modeling the behavior and setting the tone.
Very much so. Creating a culture where learning is valued over being right.
And can teams practice this awareness together? Like a collective dual awareness?
Yes, absolutely. Teams can develop a shared understanding of what triggers them collectively into protection. What are the team's typical defensive routines?
How would they do that?
The sources describe an exercise like the one Elizabeth did with Giovanna's team. They literally mapped it out. What situations trigger us? What do we do as individuals and as a team when triggered? What's the impact?
Making the team's iceberg visible to itself.
Exactly. Building that shared awareness allows them to notice it happening in real time. They also talk about building in skylight moments.
Extreme pauses.
Yeah, brief, intentional moments for the team to collectively check in. Where are we right now? Are we in learning mode or protection mode? Is how we're interacting helping us move forward? Maybe using frameworks like Cantor's 4-player model mover, follower, opposer, bystander to understand the dynamics.
So, conscious team reflection.
Yeah.
Okay, bringing this all together for the individual listener. The sources introduce a personal operating model. What's the idea here?
It's basically a framework to help you be more intentional about how you design your life and work to support everything we've been talking about: awareness, purpose, energy, calm.
Like a personal blueprint.
Kind of. It focuses on 4 interconnected pillars: awareness, your practices for self-reflection; purpose, connecting to your why; energy, proactive recovery and management; and relationships, cultivating supportive connections and psychological safety.
And you use this model too.
To assess what's working and what's not in each area, and then to consciously design your days or weeks to better align with your priorities and build in the practices that support deliberate calm. Planning for recovery, scheduling reflection time, clarifying purpose.
Making it practical and sustainable.
Yeah.
And it's not static, right?
Definitely not. It's meant to evolve. Revisit it regularly, maybe weekly at first, then monthly or quarterly, or whenever things change significantly. It's a dynamic tool for self-coaching.
Wow. Okay, we have covered a lot of ground here. It's a really rich framework.
It really is.
We've talked about the iceberg, the hidden drivers beneath our behavior,
Dual awareness, tuning into internal and external worlds.
the different zones, familiar, adaptive, protection, danger, and the adaptability paradox.
How we construct emotions based on brain predictions, shaped by our personal narratives.
The power of mindsets and beliefs as filters, creating blind spots.
The anchoring strength of purpose, connecting to our why.
The absolute necessity of managing energy and recovery, our body budget.
The levels of awareness, from unaware to adaptive, and the Johari window for feedback.
How icebergs collide in teams, and using the ladder of inference and advocacy inquiry to navigate that.
The critical role of psychological safety for team learning.
And strategies for raising team awareness, like mapping triggers and using skylight moments.
And finally, pulling it together with a personal operating model focused on awareness, purpose, energy, and relationships.
It really provides a comprehensive way to think about navigating challenges, fostering learning, and leading ourselves and others more effectively, especially with all the change and complexity out there.
Absolutely. Understanding these dynamics gives us more choice, more agency in how we respond.
So maybe a final thought for you, our listener, as you reflect on all this. Considering the constant change in your own work, your own life, what's just one aspect of your own inner iceberg? Maybe a belief that holds you back sometimes, a go-to reaction that doesn't always serve you, or perhaps that neglected need for energy recovery. What's one thing you feel might be most valuable for you to explore a bit more deeply right now?
Just starting that exploration, that curiosity about your own inner workings is really the first step towards practicing deliberate calm. This conversation is hopefully just the beginning of that journey for you.